this is College of Circles. I'm Jeff, and today I'll be reviewing the Guests, NPCs and Monsters bundle from Wizkids and Critical Role. In part 1 of this review, I'll be looking at the box sets NPCs of Wild Mount, Guests of Critical Role, and NPCs of Tal'Doreii. In part 2, I'll review the 3 Monsters of Exandria box sets. All of these box sets were released as part of Wave 3 of the Critical Role figures in July 2022, except for the 3rd Monsters of Exandria set, which was released in Wave 4, February 2023. I play Dungeons & Dragons and make extensive use of my miniatures. My reviews are based on how well the figures enhance gameplay at my table, how often they are likely to be used, and how much do they add to the game when used. I use a 10-point scale with 0 to 2 points in each of 5 categories. Those categories are details in the sculpt, quality of the paint application, how well the pose of the figure helps tell its story, how versatile the figure is, and how much the figure inspires me to want to create story and gameplay with it. Most figures will get a 1 in each category, with exceptional traits getting a 2 and traits that miss the mark getting a 0. At my table, I generally treat the figures literally. What the player sees in the figure is what the character sees in the game. Of course, these are all my subjective opinions and yours may differ. If you like this content and want to see more, please like, subscribe, and share. With all of that said, here's the figures. The first box set we have is the NPCs of Wild Mount. This set consists of 8 medium and 1 large figure, and had an MSRP of $89.99. For our first figure, we have the Gentleman. Not the most exciting figure, but he does have some versatility, and in the right campaign could be a significant NPC. The paint, sculpt, and pose are fine, but what makes him stand out is the overall design. With his blue skin and carnival-like attire, I'm going to be putting him in the Shadowfell, probably in Isolde's Carnival. For our second figure, we have Kiri. Now throughout my collection, I have so many Kenku/Tengu figures, and here's the pint-sized version. This figure looks good, and it's nice to see some color on a Kenku's eyes. The only real issue with this figure is that it is so specific, it will probably never be used unless I'm running a whole community of Kenkus. For our third figure, we have Yusa Arenis. I like the hair and the details in the coat. This figure could have scored higher for me if they had just given her a mouth. Otherwise, a fine NPC figure, and one that will pair nicely with another upcoming figure. At the 4th spot, we have Marion Lavore, and this figure has several quality control issues. The paint is blotchy throughout, especially in the hair. The sculpt looks poorly defined, almost like an out-of-focus portrait. At least she has a mouth, and the pose does help identify her as something, I'm thinking like an opera singer. Moving on to number 5, we have the Sunbreaker Uluman. Now, Minotaur figures are tough for Dungeons & Dragons. If you have a large base figure, it really makes it strictly a monster or an NPC, while putting it on a medium base makes it more of a PC figure. Uluman is on a large base, but would have been a perfect PC as a Minotaur fighter or paladin. It's a nice looking figure, but he doesn't really have any wow factor. I would have more use for it if it was on a medium base, but as intended, it's just fine. Our 6th figure is Trent Ikathon. I see him as Yusa's husband, and together they are the king and queen of a race of yellow-wearing, mouthless humans. Seriously, why is it so hard to paint a mouth? This could be a good figure, but the staff is misshaped and it does have other paint issues. The best part is the synergy with Yusa and what I plan to do with them as a couple in my game. So, did you want to play a Turtle Bard? At number 7, we have your figure in Orly Skiffback. The paint is pretty blotchy, with completely different eyes on either side of his head, and his tattoos continue on through his sword. I like the idea of this figure, and the very specific role he fills could be a lot of fun, but as a miniature, the execution is lacking. At number 8, we have Essek Thelis. On the plus side, it has a completed face, with pupils and a nose and a mouth. On the minus, maybe they should have left the face completely blank. The pose of this figure suggests an intimidating wizard, but that face is more Dwight from The Office than Gentarum Mage. I guess he could disapprove his opponents to death. Our ninth and final figure in the NPCs of Wildemount is the Traveler. Now I'm torn on this figure, as this is one time where the lack of a face is intentional and establishes some character traits, and the overall design does look good from a distance. But looking at other figures in this set, I think this figure is a byproduct of lazy design and poor execution that just happens to prove the adage that even a broken clock is right twice a day. Now, I do have a use for this figure, but I think it represents all of the problems I have with this particular set. The NPCs of Wildemount has some good ideas, but poor execution throughout. As mentioned before, the Traveler is a good example of the mediocrity of this set. What is really astonishing about this set is the sticker price of $89.99 or $10 per figure. For $10, I expect much better execution than what we got here. The Traveler's fine, but for $10, fine just isn't good enough. The premise of this figure is so grand, only to be let down by that bland sculpt. These robes should be flowing like we see in so many other figures. Wizkids can put out amazing figures at this price point when it wants to, but here it appears too many figures were rushed. Our second box set is the Guests of Critical Role. This set consists of 10 medium figures and had an original MSRP of $69.99. Our first figure in this set is Lionel. Not a good figure, but fortunately the rest of the figures will be much better. Lionel's paint job is atrocious, with a lot of bleed over and a very silly face. I guess he could be a Furbolg woodsman, but I really can't see ever using this figure. Other than the soft weapon, our second figure, Tova, is looking pretty good. Nice scar paint on the face, and a simple but serious pose, and we have a nice halfling or dwarven barbarian here. Her versatility is her best feature, as she could be any small race and any martial character. At number 3, we have Riani. Her face is painted well, but there's a mix of some good details and sloppy application in her clothes. Her halo really helps create an identity, and I can imagine her being the royal guard for Trent and Yusa from NPCs of Wildemount. A solid figure that will find a place on my table. Our fourth figure is Kalayana, with many of the same strengths and issues as Riani. I like the hair flowing over her face, but then there's skin paint coming through some of that hair. The pose and spell effects work well, as does her tail. There's a lot going on with this figure, and those details help overcome some of the sloppy paint. Our fifth figure is Shakaste. The sculpt is the highlight of this mystical person, especially the hair. The paint doesn't do a lot for the overall aesthetic, but doesn't detract from it either. The pose works with what this figure represents. I can see a mystical hermit that the party would have to visit for some long-lost knowledge. An overall nifty little figure. The sixth figure is one of the best in this set. Kashaw Vesh has just about everything I look for in a figure. The sculpt, paint, and pose come together for a dynamic fighter with loads of details. The way her mouth is painted gives her the effect of screaming as she thrusts her spear, and you can actually see her teeth, the bottom of her lip, and in the dark parts in the back of her mouth. This is really what every figure should offer. Our seventh figure is Zara, a tiefling sorceress with a black patent leather fetish. I like that her pose seems to be enticing, like she's offering the party a deal they know will corrupt them. The face paint is a little off. I'm not sure if she's supposed to have white under her eyes here or if that was a mistake. Overall, a cool figure, and it'll make a nice anti-hero NPC. The eighth figure is Thorbeer, a dwarven martial figure. Another one that shows you can get tiny details in small places. His face has a determined expression as he is ready to swing his axe. Everything works with this figure, even though there are no standout details. Our ninth figure is Garthok, which looks like a half-orc ranger or rogue. The energy of the figure is really low, as the combination of facial expression and pose makes him look like he just has a lot on his mind as he's out for a stroll. Overall, this is a figure that feels less than the sum of its parts. The 10th and final figure is Keg, another shining example of what can be done with a small figure. The armor and weapon is almost perfectly painted, as is his eyes and hair. To me, he looks like a human child dressed up in armor, which could be a compelling story point with the right group of players. A solid, well-made, and executed figure. The Guests of Critical Role is a much better set than the NPCs of Wild Mount, and is filled with figures that will get repeat action in my games. And for just $7 a figure, it's also a much better value. Some of these figures are so well painted, like Keg and Kashad Vesh, that they really highlight how bad some of the other figures were done. These figures really do manage to raise the bar. The third box set in this review is the MPCs of Tal'Doreii, which consists of a whopping 12 figures. 9 of them are medium with 3 small, and on its own sold for $69.99. Figure 1 in this set is Sean Gilmore. The paint here is vibrant and well applied, and the combination of attire and pose makes me think of Sean as a carnival barker or some sort of marketplace merchant. I've said before, I love my townsfolk, and Sean is going straight into my town NPC collection. Our second figure is Lady Kima. At first glance, this little fighter has meticulous armor and a beautiful head of hair. When you get really close, you can see just how well her face is painted. Her eyes have a ton of detail and expression, and you can just make out a possible smirk. Seeing how much detail can be applied in such a small space leaves little doubt to me that many of the WizKid figures are underachieving. The third figure is Jarrett Hallworth. Again, really nice detail in his face and a solid sculpt and pose. This is a figure that can fill in for any ranged martial build using light armor. We get yet another solid figure at number 4 with Victor. Right away, I see pairing him up with Dr. Victra Mordenheim in the Domain of Dread Lemordia. On my figure, there is a mistake in that his right eye is not painted, but I'm going to utilize that flaw and describe him as having an empty eye socket. Our fifth figure is Allura Visorin, who kind of reminds me of Elsa from Frozen. Maybe this is the perfect figure for a Treat Monk's Disney Princess Creation Bard. Really nice sculpt and pose works for her. I also really like her transparent staff, but wish her face had as much care as Lady Kima's did. The sixth figure in the lineup is Earthbreaker Groon, an amazing sculpt with all the muscle definition you could ask for in a monk. The pose is spot on, and he could have many uses as a PC or NPC. He is really specifically a monk, but fills that role well, and another standout figure in this set. Our seventh figure and seventh above average score. Curran the Hammerer is simplicity done well. Everything about this figure just works. The sculpt, the paint, the pose. This guy is the best street fighter in whatever world he inhabits. I would probably use him in a single fight, but a tough one, similar to the German aircraft mechanic in Raiders of the Lost Ark. My players will have to get dirty to kill this guy off. Up next we have Sinoker, and this one is hard to judge. I understand that for his place in Critical Role, the broken neck will make sense, but for my purposes and my criteria, I just can't with this figure. The sculpt renders him almost completely useless to me, unless I try to give him a story that may be fun for a moment, but will get old to me rather quickly. The pose and paint are okay, but not enough to change my view on this guy. On to number 9, and we are back to the great figures. Cassandra De Rollo is a near-perfect sculpt, paint job, and her role as an aristocratic rider does inspire me. Yet another NPC that will be joining my standard townsfolk lineup. Jaman Saord comes in as the 10th figure, and talk about a standout. Jaman is statuesque and demands to be given a story. Unfortunately, for such a large and prominent figure, the detail in her face is lacking, and the pose doesn't help sell who she is. Our 11th figure in this set is Kaylee Shorthalt. The more I look at this figure, the worse she gets. I can't tell if she is playing a flute or handing someone a scroll case. It looks like she has a black eye. Parts of her hair are missing paint. Yes, this is a small figure and harder to paint, but we've seen better work on too many figures to excuse the mess on Kaylee. Our final figure is Seeker Assam Emring. This guy could fill many roles, but really looks like a rogue with the crossbow expert feat or a member of the Gentarum. The tattoo on his face looks great and is enough for me to overlook the fact that he's missing a mouth. I should probably be harsher on this figure, but I've been pretty happy with this set, and after 12 figures, I'm feeling generous. The NPCs of Tal'Doreii surprises me in one way. With so many figures, I was expecting to be disappointed with the quality. Fortunately, minus a couple of weak figures, the quality is consistently strong through most of the figures. 10 of them received a 7 or higher, and the average score of Tal'Doreii just edged out the Guests of Critical Role. Another steal at $69.99, and certainly worthy of buying in the bundle set. Now in part 2 of this video, I'll be looking at the Monsters of Exandria box sets 1, 2, and 3. Make sure you don't miss that video. Please subscribe and hit that notification button. Until then, thank you for watching this episode of College of Circles. I'm Jeff. See you next time.